Your government tells you trade is prosperity. They say imports make you richer. What they don't tell you is that every container ship docking at your port could be the first stage of economic surrender. Right now, your country is probably trapped in a dependency system so refined that you mistake it for progress. The mechanism has 5 stages. By the end of this video, you will see exactly which stage you are in. This is not about protectionism versus free trade. This is about how import dependency is engineered to become permanent. How entire nations get locked into patterns that look like growth but function like submission. The system worked on India when Britain turned the world's largest textile exporter into a raw material colony. It worked on Latin America when they tried to break free and failed. It is working right now on countries that believe they are making their own choices. Import dependency does not happen by accident. It happens because one side has mapped out the endgame while the other is celebrating immediate benefits. You think you are buying cheaper goods. What you are actually doing is dismantling your own production capacity, one purchase at a time. And once that capacity is gone, the price you pay is determined by how desperate you are. Stage 1 begins with the illusion of mutual benefit. A more advanced economy offers to trade with you. The terms seem fair. They have manufactured goods. You have raw materials or cheap labor. Everyone wins, right? The mistake is thinking this exchange happens between equals. One side controls the terms of trade, one side sets the prices, one side decides what gets produced where. Look at India in the early 1800s. For thousands of years, India was the global center of textile manufacturing. Indian cotton dominated European markets. The British East India Company was initially just a trader. That was stage 1. A mutual benefit. But Britain wanted control of the supply chain. They wanted the profits from manufacturing, not just trading. Here is how they did it. They imposed tariffs of 70 to 80% on Indian textiles entering Britain. Indian weavers could no longer sell to the British market. At the same time, British textiles flowed into India duty-free. Within decades, India's textile exports collapsed by 98%. British imports to India surged by over 6,000%. India went from producing 25% of global textiles to 2%. Master weavers became beggars. Entire cities like Dhaka shrank from hundreds of thousands to 50,000 people. But the system did not just destroy Indian textiles. It reshaped the entire economy. India still grew cotton, but now it was raw cotton, shipped to British mills. The finished textiles were sold back to India at a premium. India became a captive market and a raw material supplier. This was not market failure. This was market design. Stage 2 is where dependency deepens because you are now locked into a specific role. You are no longer competing. You are supplying. Your economy gets restructured around exporting raw materials. Your infrastructure gets built to serve this role. Railways designed not to connect your cities, but to move commodities to coastal export hubs. You think you are developing. What you are doing is becoming more efficient at feeding someone else's industrial machine. Latin America learned this after World War II. Economists like Raúl Prebisch saw that developing countries were locked into exporting commodities while importing finished goods. The terms of trade were rigged. Commodity prices stayed low while manufactured goods stayed expensive. Prebisch argued that poor countries needed to break this cycle by developing their own industries. The strategy was import substitution industrialization. Protect domestic industries with tariffs. Subsidize local production. It sounded logical, but it failed. Why? Because by the time Latin American countries tried to industrialize, they were already too far into stage 2. Their economies had been restructured. Their elites were invested in the export model. Foreign companies controlled key sectors. The technology gap was too large. When they tried to protect their industries, they faced capital flight and brutal loan conditions from the IMF. By the 1980s, import substitution was declared a failure. Not because the idea was wrong, but because the system was designed to make it fail. This is the genius of stage 2. It makes you believe you have agency, you are making investments, building infrastructure, creating jobs. But every choice is constrained by the fact that you do not control the value chain. You are stuck in the low value part of production. And the longer you stay there, the harder it is to climb up. Then comes stage 3. Your country is no longer just dependent on imports for finished goods. It is dependent on imports for the inputs needed to make anything at all. Your industries rely on imported machinery, imported components, imported technology. If the supply gets cut off, your entire economy grinds to a halt. This is about industrial capacity, food security, energy, everything. Europe is living through this with energy dependency on Russia. For decades, Europe relied on cheap Russian natural gas. It seemed rational. Trade was supposed to make war less likely. But when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, that dependency became a weapon. Russia cut off gas supplies. Energy prices spiked. Industries shut down. Europe scrambled for alternatives. But the infrastructure did not exist. Building it takes years. China understands this better than anyone. Over the past 2 decades, China has systematically built dependencies into global supply chains for critical materials. Rare earth elements essential for electronics and batteries. Magnets for electric vehicles. China controls over 90% of global rare earth refining. Europe imports more than 90% of its magnets from China. If China decides to cut off exports, entire industries collapse overnight. This is not accidental. China explicitly frames its strategy around reducing its own dependencies while increasing others' dependency on it. The United States is waking up to this late. For decades, American companies outsourced production to China because labor was cheaper, but the cost was dependency. Now the US realizes it cannot manufacture the chips it needs for defense. It cannot produce the pharmaceuticals it needs. This is stage 3. Your economy is structurally dependent. And the supplier knows it can use that dependency as leverage. Stage 4 is where dependency becomes political control. The country that supplies your critical imports does not just have economic leverage, it has veto power over your decisions. You cannot sanction them without destroying your own economy. You cannot criticize them without risking supply cutoffs. Your sovereignty no longer belongs to you. China has demonstrated this repeatedly. When Australia called for an independent investigation into COVID origins, China retaliated by banning Australian coal, barley, and wine. When Lithuania allowed Taiwan to open a diplomatic office, China blocked Lithuanian exports. When South Korea deployed a missile defense system China opposed, China imposed boycotts on Korean products. These were demonstrations of power. If you depend on China for trade, you play by China's rules. The same pattern shows up throughout history. Germany used its position as largest importer of Eastern European agriculture before World War II to gain political influence. The United States has done this with sanctions on Iran, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela. Sanctions only work if the target cannot easily replace what it is losing. But sanctions also hurt the country imposing them if that country depends on cheap imports. When Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018, American consumers paid through higher costs. China retaliated with tariffs on American agriculture. The trade war had no clear winner because both sides were entangled. But the long-term goal was decoupling. Both understood that dependency is vulnerability. This is stage 4. Trade is no longer about prosperity. It is about leverage. And if you are dependent, every negotiation starts from weakness. You cannot walk away. You need what they have. So you make concessions. You soften your stance, not because you changed your mind, but because you cannot afford the economic consequences. This is control without occupation. Stage 5 is collapse. The dependency becomes unsustainable and the system breaks. The supplier cuts you off, or a war disrupts trade routes, or a pandemic exposes how fragile supply chains are. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. The imports stop, your industries cannot function. Your population cannot get what it needs. Look at what happened during COVID. Global supply chains seized up. Countries depending on imports of medical supplies found themselves unable to respond. The United States was bidding against itself for basic protective equipment. Countries hoarded supplies. Export bans went into effect. The just-in-time efficiency became catastrophic vulnerability. People died because of import dependency. Or look at the trade wars now. In 2025, the United States imposed sweeping tariffs. A baseline 10% on everything. Punitive tariffs of 30 to 50% on countries with large trade surpluses. The goal was to force restructuring, to bring manufacturing back, to reduce dependency. But the immediate effect was chaos. Global trade flows contracted by 5 to 8%. US imports from China fell by 90%. Other countries retaliated. The system buckled. For countries with highest exposure, real incomes fell by 3% or more. Canada, Mexico, Ireland faced recessions. Smaller countries caught in the middle had no buffer. Their economies contracted. Their currencies collapsed. This is stage 5. The system that looked stable disintegrates. And countries that built economies around import dependency have no fallback. The suffering is real. Jobs disappear. Prices spike. Shortages spread. You are already in this system. You might be in stage 2, where your economy serves someone else's value chain. You might be in stage 3, depending on critical imports. You might be sliding into stage 4, where your government makes decisions based on what suppliers will tolerate. The only question is whether you see it in time. So what do? First, understand this is not conspiracy. This is business model. Rational actors create dependencies. They lock in advantages. They use trade as influence. Second, recognize that decoupling is painful but necessary for sovereignty. Every country that successfully industrialized protected domestic industries early. Britain did it, the United States did it, Germany, Japan, South Korea, China did it. Third, prioritize resilience over efficiency. Just in time, supply chains work until they don't. When crisis hits, you need slack. You need redundancy. You need ability to produce critical goods domestically, even if it costs more. Fourth, control your critical inputs. If you depend on another country for energy, rare earths, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, you have illusion of independence. Either develop domestic sources or diversify suppliers. Fifth, recognize economic policy is national security policy. Every decision about trade has strategic consequences. If you offshore manufacturing, you lose skills and knowledge. If you gut your industrial base for cheaper imports, you lose capacity to respond when the world changes. Finally, except there is no neutral global order, the rules benefit the rule makers. The game is rigged. The trap is real. The stages are visible. And the endgame is written unless you change the pattern. Countries depending on imports for survival do not make free choices. They make constrained choices. And over time, those constraints become chains. The system is designed to feel inevitable. But history shows the only countries that escape poverty and dependency refuse to play the game on someone else's terms. You are living inside a structure where imports are leverage, control mechanisms, tools of influence. And the people who benefit will never tell you the truth. They will talk about efficiency and prosperity. They will tell you protectionism is backwards. And for them, it is true. But for countries locked into dependency, trade is the mechanism of subordination. This is not about rejecting trade. This is about recognizing trade relationships are power relationships. If you are not building industrial capacity, not controlling critical inputs, not diversifying supply chains, then you are choosing dependence. You are choosing to let someone else determine your future. And when crisis comes, and it will come, you will have no one to blame. The 5 stages are not theory, they are history repeating. India in the 1800s, Latin America in the 20th century, Europe with Russian energy, the United States with Chinese manufacturing. The pattern is the same. The dependency is engineered. The collapse is predictable. And the only defense is seeing it before it's too late. If this opened your eyes to the cage you are living in, subscribe. Because in the next video, we dismantle the rest of the illusion.